turning up. Actually thought we were more full, but there you go. Why have I dragged you here? For accessibility. Well, web accessibility is kind of key to the future of the web. Okay, it's all about everybody, no matter who, what, where you're from, anything. You should be able to access the information of the web. There should be no barriers at all. And at the moment, we're kind of walking towards that. And I'd like to move a much slicker pace at that to there. So, one of the key things that needs to be done is accessibility. We need to make all web pages, and I'd say all web content, or I'd say all content, accessible. So I've got a good friend from the RNIB, Julie, and Mark, her colleague, to come and talk. And I'd hope that you have questions afterwards to give to them. Okay, so we'll start now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'm probably going to be wandering this way and that way and up the stairs as well if I feel like the exercise, so be ready for that. My name's Julie Howell, and I work at RNIB. I'm the Digital Policy Development Officer at RNIB. And I guess my job is helping RNIB to work out what we need to do to make sure that blind and partially sighted people are able to have equal access to information and services and equal rights in the digital future. So I'm concerned not only with ensuring that websites are accessible and coordinating RNIB's campaign for good web design, but also doing a lot of work on accessibility of mobile phones and digital television and ordinary phones and basically anything that you can plug in. I'm here this afternoon with my colleague Mark Prowse. Mark is going to be talking to you a little bit later on in the afternoon, but I just wanted to start really by telling you what the campaign is about and why RNIB in particular is engaged in a subject like this, because I don't know how you feel about charities, or if you've heard anybody from the voluntary sector come and speak to you before. I just checked to make sure that Mark wasn't wearing socks and sandals, and indeed he isn't, and nor am I. And hopefully, if anything, we'll leave you with a more positive and dynamic idea of what charities and the voluntary sector are about. Everything I talked to you about this afternoon is actually available on our website pretty much. And on this first slide, I've got the website address. It's rnib.org.uk/webaccesscentre. And we'll have our contact details coming up at the very end as well. So if you have any questions that you don't want to ask us this afternoon, you're very welcome to send us an email, and our email addresses will be coming up. Now, I do talks to a great variety of audiences, some people who know a great deal about disability and technology, and some who don't know a great deal about either, but are responsible for policy. And sometimes I think it's a good idea to start from the basis of thinking about old media before we start to think about new media. So I want to start with a piece of old media that many of you probably have in your pockets or in your wallet, and perhaps you could have a look and see if you do, and take it out. Can you check your wallet in your pockets or whatever to see if you've got a book of stamps in there, please? If you do, can you kind of hold them up in the air, just so that I've got an idea that some of you have? I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, because I use email for communication, so I don't have stamps a great deal. So only 2 people here. Okay. I wonder if I wouldn't want you to lose them. If we could pass them round. Actually, let me test my stair climbing skills. Thank you. Make sure that you get them back towards the end. That'd be great. What I'm going to ask you to do is just have a look at this everyday piece of old media and pass them around to each other and have a look at those. And in a little while, I'm going to explain to you something about the way that things are designed, because you know, quite often when people hear RNIB talking about the importance of people with disabilities being able to use your websites, people very quickly think, oh, that's something that we really don't want to do. That's going to mean making the web a worse place for people who can see, or it's going to mean taking our beautiful, well-crafted designs and making them ugly so that those blind people are going to be able to use it. And that's really not what this is about. The main message to take away, I guess, is that when we're talking about design for all, that includes not just people with a variety of disabilities. It means people using different kinds of technology to access your content, so it's very much about the future. But it's also about making sure that just everybody and anybody can access your content. So that's the message to take away. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, I don't know to what extent you look at the history of the web and how it all came about and how it's constructed in your studies, but the web was invented by this chap whose name is Tim Berners-Lee. And Tim feels very strongly that the web should be for everybody. I think you'd be forgiven if you only got online in the past couple of years for thinking that the web belongs to these great, huge multinational companies, or that you have to have a lot of money to have a presence online. But when Tim created the web, it was to be a resource that everybody could use, not just to find information and use services, but also to create your own web page and post your own information online. And I don't know about you, but I certainly have my own website since 1995, and I've been doing that and I'm really enjoying taking part, and that's what the web's all about. Tim feels very strongly that the web should be for everyone, whether or not that person has a disability. The web's an environment that should be a great level field for everybody. And there's a very famous quote from Tim that you'll hear everybody recite to you whenever anybody is talking about web accessibility. And it's this: the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. And gosh, I mean, Tim is the guy who invented it, so he should know. Now, the reason RNIB has got involved in this stuff, RNIB is a very, very old organisation. We were created in 1868 solely as a publisher of Braille, and indeed we're still the largest Braille publisher in Europe. I think we've published over 50 million pages of the stuff in the last year alone. But we try to be wherever blind and partially sighted people are, to make sure that people with visual impairment are just able to participate, able to read, whatever they want to do, on equal terms with people who can see. Blind people have been using computers very successfully for many, many years before the web was created. And later on, my colleague Mark is going to be showing you some of the technology that he uses in order to be able to use the computer. And indeed, when the web was invented in the early to mid-90s, it was a very accessible environment, because back then it was mostly text. So that was fine. A blind person would visit the site using a piece of software loaded onto their ordinary PC that would interpret the HTML text and convert it into audible synthesized speech. And we'll see some later. Might start. Perhaps not. And that all worked very successfully. But towards the end of the 90s, we started to get inquiries through from blind people who said, well, I thought I understood how to use the web, but all of a sudden I'm going to websites and all I'm hearing is image, 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 and I'm not actually getting to any content. Or I go to a website that I've enjoyed using in the past and it says unsupported script. Or I just hear a lot of gobbledygook, none of the content, what's going on? So we were obviously concerned about this at RNIB, so we had a look. And what we could see was, yes, the web was becoming a lot more graphical, but that in itself wasn't the problem. The problem was that web designers weren't describing the graphics, weren't giving a description of the function of an image and why it was there, which was really not very helpful. So sighted people were able to get lots of information, blind people weren't getting very much from it at all. Tim was also very concerned about this, Tim Berners-Lee, so he set up a project group of the W3, the World Wide Web Consortium that he directs, the W3C is all about standards and recommendations for how the web should be constructed. He set up a project group called the Web Accessibility Initiative, and in May of 1999, WAI produced the first set of guidelines on how to design websites so that everybody can use them. Now you can find those guidelines online, and you might have come across them already. They're at w3.org/WAI. I don't plan to go into the technicalities of the guidelines this afternoon because you're all quite capable of looking the guidelines up yourself and finding out all about them. But something that's seems to be a lesser known fact is that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are the guidelines for web designers to follow, are one of a set of 3. Now, when RNIB goes around doing talks about this subject, sometimes designers raise their hands and say, but why are you always putting the onus on designers to do something about this? You know, it's not all of our responsibility to make the web accessible. Well, that's absolutely right. And indeed, this is just one part of a 3-part effort to make the web more accessible for everyone. So you've got the Web Content Guidelines, which are for web designers, content producers to follow. But it's all very well you producing beautiful, compliant, accessible code. But what if the browser or the piece of access technology that a disabled person is using makes nonsense of it, produces very arbitrary, spurious results? Well, that's no good. So we need browsers to be coded to an acceptable standard as well. So there's another set of guidelines, which are the user agent accessibility guidelines for people who develop browsers, Microsoft, etc., and people who are developing the access technology disabled people use to make sure they're all pitching at the same standard. And there's a third set. You know, many people are not like yourselves, have had no training in web design at all, and are web designers by virtue of the fact that they stumbled into W.H. Smith's one rainy Saturday afternoon, picked up a copy of .NET magazine, and it had a CD-ROM on the front with some free web design software on it, and off they go, designing websites and charging 20k a pop for them, which is fine, but when those people design inaccessible websites, they don't know how to put it right because they don't understand the code. And many people who are using content management systems these days don't understand the code. So there's another set of guidelines called the WAI's authoring tool accessibility guidelines, and the idea is that the software companies that produce authoring tools follow those guidelines to try and make code accessible automatically. So the kind of companies that are going to read those and implement those are Microsoft, Adobe for PDF, Macromedia for Flash, etc. So there's 3 sets of guidelines there, and they're all available on the website there online. Moving on then. So RNIB considered this to be so serious that blind people were starting to find the web inaccessible that in May of 1999 we established a campaign to educate and to raise awareness of the issue. And it's called the Campaign for Good Web Design. Now, I chose that title very deliberately. So I try and get away from this idea of using terms like disability and accessibility, because it tends to turn people off. People have a very fixed idea about what disability means and what it's like, and think, accessibility, that's taking beautiful listed buildings and sticking ugly ramps on the outside, and it will mean raising my website to the ground, or producing a boring, ugly text-only version. And that's certainly not what it's about. I've come up with a working definition of the campaign, it's kind of aims, if you like, and it's this: accessible websites, systems and services are those that can be used by everyone, regardless of ability, disability, technology and circumstance. So that means that every person, whether or not that person has any kind of impairment or disability, whether it's a temporary or a permanent impairment, say you broke your arm, couldn't use the mouse, and it gets better, whatever technology they're using to access the web. We might be very hung up at the moment on the idea of accessing the web sitting down using a PC, but increasingly you might be using a Mac, or you might be surfing to a website using a television or a mobile phone or a PDA or a web-enabled car. Many other technologies yet to be invented. And circumstance as well. Again, we tend to think of surfing the web sitting down, but increasingly we'll be using kiosks in public places or using portable handheld devices. And what if we go from outside where it's bright to indoors, the lighting changes, or if we're outside and the sun pops behind a cloud or appears from behind a cloud, and again the lighting changes. So Campaign for Good Web Design is about making sure all people using all technology in all circumstance can get to your content. Okay. It's important to bear in mind that not every type of disability is going to result in an issue for somebody using the web. Now, the government would tell you that there's 8.6 million people in the with some kind of disability. However, not every kind of disability is going to impact on the way that somebody uses your website. If you think about disability as meaning, oh, that's somebody who uses a wheelchair, well, how is using a wheelchair going to affect how a person uses your website? Well, it's not, unless of course they're accessing it via a kiosk, and then you've got height issues there. But that's not what we're talking about this afternoon. Let's imagine we're talking about PC access for a moment. So I call this the big four. There's a big four groups of impairments that people can have that can impact on their use of computer and therefore their use of the internet. And the big four are sight loss or blindness, hearing loss or deafness, manual dexterity, cognitive impairments. I'm going to go through those for you more slowly. Sight loss or blindness then. At this point it's worth pointing out to you that blind people and partially sighted people are two completely separate groups of people with very different needs. Because a blind person, my colleague Mark is blind and we'll be talking to you shortly. Mark, for example, can't see at all, can't see the screen, so relies on other senses in order to get the information. A partially sighted person can see and can see the screen, but needs to be able to adapt the interface to have colours and a size of text and a font that suits their needs. So two different groups there. The kind of needs that somebody, the kind of requirements that somebody with sight loss might require, for example, someone's blind, is for images to be described so that they know not only that an image is on the screen, but what it's for, what its function is. But you know, that having that there can also help people who are accessing the web, who are not blind, but are accessing the web without graphics, either because they live in an area where there's no broadband and their dial-up connection is so slow, or they're using a device that just doesn't display graphics. So it's very helpful for them to have functional descriptions of the graphics as well. Partially sighted people need to be able to adjust the colour scheme on your websites by changing the settings on their machine locally to a higher contrast that's going to suit them better. And that can help people, as I mentioned a moment ago, in poor lighting conditions. I mean, how many times have you tried to use an ATM, a cash machine, and the sun's shining on it really brightly, and you can't see the screen, and maybe you give up because you think, I don't want to press the button for 50 quid when I know I've only got a tenner that I can afford to take out at the moment. If only you could adjust the contrast on those screens, it would make life a lot easier, wouldn't it? The things that we do to make access better for blind people also assist people in eyes-busy situations. Probably one of the few people in the UK who's been in a web-enabled car. You can surf the web when you're in a car by equipping it, in fact, with the same tech that a blind person would use, so that you navigate by hearing the web page and you speak to it and it recognises your voice and follows the links, you know, that you dictate. Driving is an eyes-busy situation. It's like being blind because your eyes are fixed on the road when you're driving, so there's some similarities there. People who are deaf or hard of hearing, now you might wonder, you know, well, why is that important for web design, because the web is a visual medium? Well, of course it's not, it's an information medium, and increasingly, especially with the advent of broadband, so many websites now are multimedia. You only have to look at what's happening on the BBC's website, and in fact they're going to be opening up their archive as well. There's a great deal of rich media on there, a great deal of audio-visual content. Obviously, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, that's going to be a problem. If there's audio, you don't know what's there. So it's helpful to have text transcripts of any audio. But that doesn't just help people who are deaf. It also helps people who, again, have slower access to the web and for whatever reason can't stream audio, can't download the plugin, are behind a firewall, can't download the plugin, can't use the plugin. Or people who have English as a second language, who might find English easier to deal with when it's in the written form, as opposed to audibly, you know, with accents and everything. The next group is a horrible term, manual dexterity, which really means any trouble using your arms. Again, we tend to think about the web as something that we use in front of a PC or with a mouse, but there's no law that says you have to use the mouse when you're using a computer. In fact, you should find that you can yank the mouse out the back of the computer and still be able to use any website just using the keyboard by using tab to tab through the links on a page and then hitting enter to action them. It's very easy to do that. keyboard access is important for people who can't use the mouse because they might have arthritis or tremor, might not have any arms at all. Mark will be using his computer shortly, but he doesn't use a mouse. And the reason Mark doesn't use a mouse isn't because he can't hold the mouse. It's because to use a mouse you need to be able to see the screen so you can see the pointer. I mean, try using a mouse with the monitor switched off and you'll see what I mean. So keyboard access can be very important to a great range of people. But also if you make your website keyboard accessible, it's also going to work for people who are using new technologies that don't have a mouse. And many new technologies don't if you're surfing using your television or using your phone or your PDA or whatever. So you're supporting more than those people with disabilities. And the final group that I think tends to get forgotten about when we're talking about accessible design are people with cognitive impairments. There are many, many conditions and illnesses, if you like, that affect memory and concentration. And those people really benefit from your website having good structure, with the navigation being logical, and using plain English is so important. And that also helps people who have English, again, as the second language, and people who are new to the internet, who don't want to go through reams and reams of very complicated text to find their way around your website. Okay, I wanted to give you an idea of the kind of the numbers that we're talking about here of people who are affected by these impairments, because if you're doing your research to find out how many people with disabilities there are in the UK, the official government statistic is in the range of 8.6 million. However, that's very, very low indeed. That really takes into account the people who register as having a disability. And many people are not registered as disabled, either because they have the kind of disability where there is no registration process involved, or because they don't know that they can register, or don't know there are benefits to registering, or they just choose not to. Lots of people just don't want to go on and register as having a disability. Perhaps they've acquired their impairment as a consequence of growing older and just think, oh, I'm not disabled, that's not something that's happened to me, and just don't want to register. So I found it more useful to go to the groups that represent people with those big four kinds of impairments to see how many we're talking about. And already, I spoke to RNID and they told me that there are 9 million people in the UK who are deaf or hard of hearing alone. There are 6 million people in the UK with some level of dyslexia, difficulty reading, 2 million blind and partially sighted people in the UK, that figures from RNIB. 1.8 million people experience some degree of colour blindness, the majority of whom are men. There are 1.2 million people in the UK with learning disability. 450,000 people in the UK experience epilepsy who might not appreciate a lot of flashing on your website. It's kind of okay to have flashing on your website as long as the person visiting it can switch it off if they have a need to do that. There are 350,000 people per year affected by stroke in the UK that can produce any of those four impairments. There are 85,000 people in the UK with multiple sclerosis. I don't know if you know much about MS. That's the condition that I have. I was diagnosed with MS when I was 19. And that gives me those big four, not so much the hearing loss, but the impairments that I can have, trouble seeing, can lose my colour vision because of the way the illness has affected me, but also very much so the concentration thing and the memory loss thing, a big, big problem for me, which is why I do lecturing on public speaking, because I like to push myself as hard as I can. And there are many other conditions such as cerebral palsy, head injury, injuries caused by accident that can cause any combination of these different kinds of impairments. At this point, have the stamps gone round? Did you all get to have a look? One person did. Did you? Because nod or something. Fantastic. I don't know if you noticed, but this is something I often do at the beginning of my sessions, is kind of show the stamps around, because it's usually something we've at least seen if we haven't got it in our own pocket or wallet. And I ask people, RIB did work with the post office to make sure that blind people could use the book of stamps easily. And I ask people, what is it that you think is special about a book of stamps, or that is an accommodation in the book of stamps that makes it easier for someone like Mark to be able to use them. And the kind of things people say, particularly if you've got second class and you've got first class, and compare the two as well, you know, they're a different colour. The second class is blue and the first class is kind of gold. And that's right, that's correct, but that wouldn't help Mark because Mark can't see the colours. So that might help someone who's partially sighted, true enough, and the rest of us, of course, but that doesn't help. People say, oh, it's bigger because it's nice big text on the front of the book of stamps, and that makes it easier to see. Well, that's also true, but that doesn't help somebody who's blind, who can't see that. There's something else. Did any of you pick up what it was? Would you like to suggest?
Perforations down the side.
Perforations down the side. Can you explain further?
Maybe there are a different number of perforations for second class and first class, so they can, a blind person could feel
On the actual
the
stamp.
difference, yeah.
You're close, very close. On the actual book of stamps, hopefully those people got their stamps back with the same number in as when I took them off them. What you'll find is down the book there are notches, and there's one notch out for first class and 2 notches out for second class, which is a tiny, tiny thing, and you probably never noticed it before, although you've probably handled so many books of stamps, you know, in the past year. But that's a typical example of where RNIB is trying to get at. Design that doesn't offend or cause problems for people who aren't blind. But that makes the world of difference to someone who's blind who wants to know if they've got first or second class stamps. Similarly, when we worked, when the euro was being introduced in the various countries, to make sure that a blind person can tell which denomination they have by touch. Done a lot of work there and on the coinage. So RNIB is very active in all kinds of areas, but this is what we're after. We've kind of realised, I mean, we've made a lot of mistakes in the past, and we've now realised that you don't design something for a blind person that's yellow and black and the size of a brick, unless it's a yellow and black brick. If it's anything else, it needs to be, you know, sexy and not look stupid, because someone who's blind doesn't, you know, want a stupid piece of kit to carry around with them. At this point, what I'd like to do is have a look at a bit of a film, if we could swap over to that, Ian, that's called Websites That Work, which shows people with a variety of these different conditions and different impairments using computers and using the internet, because I want you to get an idea that there's lots and lots of technology available that helps people with any kind of disability or a variety of impairments, as many conditions result in that, to enable people to use the computer effectively.
Cyberspace, the internet, the World Wide Web. The technology revolution had as big an impact on our daily lives in the 20th century as the Industrial Revolution did in the 19th century. This impact has been even greater for people with disabilities, opening up the possibility for all of us to fulfill our potential. Robin has cerebral palsy. She can't speak or use her hands, but she can use a computer and play computer games. Alongside her regular computer screen, she has a virtual keyboard, which she operates by using head movements to control a switch, which is fitted into the back of her wheelchair. Stuart also can't speak or use his hands. He too uses a switch controlled by his head to operate his desktop computer to browse the World Wide Web, and his laptop, fitted to his wheelchair, enables him to communicate using the text on the screen or synthetic speech.
Hello, my name is Stuart Briswell.
Bring up Microsoft Word. Begin new document. Tree
Carla uses voice recognition software to speak to her computer.
is
Programs such as Drag and Dictate help people who can't use a keyboard.
so I can use a keyboard. I'm very slow in this. up to about 3 words a minute, just so I can dictate speed in the alphabet, so I'm not on the computer all day.
Similarly, advances in technology enable people who are blind to read text by converting it into synthetic speech. All this sounds like great news, and it is. But to make it all possible, programs and websites have to be designed to allow this access technology to work. Peter Bosher is chairman of the British Computer Association.
The film continues. It's about 15 minutes long, but Ian's got a copy of it there, so I'm sure that you can get access to the rest of it should you need to. Can we move back to the PowerPoint just briefly? What I'd like to do now is, in just a moment, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague Mark. Just get the. Can you click on just one more for me, Ian? That'd be great. Thank you. Mark, we've got you twice now. You're sitting in front of a huge picture of yourself.
Sorry about that.
I just want to briefly say, as Mark's job here is, well, I say high-tech officer, but apparently it's a bit more wordy than that now, which is very RNIB. RNIB likes job titles with colons and brackets, if we can possibly manage it. What I've got here is a picture of Mark, and I just wanted to quickly, before he talks to himself, give you a quick run through of the kind of technology that Mark is using to access the web. What he's got, I've got a picture of Mark sitting actually in his office back at work, and Mark's high-tech officer, so he talks all day to people on the phone, helping them with their high-tech queries. And Mark's using an ordinary PC there, just the same as everybody else would use. The only difference is he has a piece of additional software on his computer called a screen reader. And a screen reader interprets the HTML text that websites are written in and transforms it into audible synthesized speech. So Mark's hearing what's going on the screen through a headset that he has on there. Mark gets data into the computer through touch typing, and because Mark's also a brailleist, a braille reader, he's also able to make use of a braille keyboard that's sitting underneath the computer keyboard, which is giving him some content as well, and it's refreshable, made up of plastic pins that become raised. So there's Mark tapping away, reading the braille. He's got a customer talking to him in one ear, he's got his computer talking to him in the other ear, he's speaking to the customer through the microphone. I was teasing him on the way up here. He's probably crocheting a scarf with his toes under the desk. So highly skilled is this man. At this point, Mark, can I hand things over to you for a moment, just to talk, take my arm and we can go up to the podium. So I wanted Mark to just really tell you what it's like for him to surf the web and some of the issues that he comes up against when he's using it. I'll just move the keyboard out of the way so that you can get yours down. And Mike's starting now.
Thank you. So I'm good and audible, yes? Okay. I went to a school for blind and partially sighted kids, and there was a bit of folklore that's handed down there. That there'd been a great orator at the school years before, and the school was in Worcester. We used to go down to the city of Worcester to this debating society, and so did this great orator all those years before. People were overheard. The locals were overheard chatting after one of his great orations, and they were sort of saying, "He's absolutely wonderful. But poor chap, he's so uncomfortable. I don't know what the problem is. I think he's got a threadworm or something. He keeps sort of scratching his." Anyway, he was reading braille in his back pocket. I'm going to use an electronic braille thing to give me my prompts here today, and do it openly, I think. So I've been using the net for let me think, 6 years. I was talking to Julie about this on the way down. Used to be a sort of fairly crude and difficult experience, already fairly graphical. The thing I was using was a DOS program then, where the links were sort of numbered. You'd hear a list of links, and you'd hit the number that you wanted. Tricky stuff, but it was already getting sort of very exciting for me, and I could see the potential of it. I was desperate to get better access to it. Over the years, this screen reading software that Julie was talking about has improved tremendously. We've made what was a scary graduation to Windows. There's a fair amount of learning to do, because obviously whereas the whole system is designed so that you've got all those prompts in front of you all the time, using the keyboard you've got to remember the routes to places, to the bits of the operating system that you want, and how to get to your menus and that sort of thing. So I use a screen reading program I'm doing everything from the keyboard. As Julie was saying there, the mouse is impossible. I'd have the pointer off the screen finding the mouse, I think so. There are some good. I think using the keyboard, there's no point pretending it isn't a bit. For some things it's faster. For many it's slower. Certainly having to hear everything makes it slower. There are some sort of tips and wrinkles there that you can use. The screen reader offers various things that make it quicker. Zapping there's a keystroke that will enable you to jump quickly to an input field and that sort of thing, rather than hearing the sort of 200 odd links that Amazon asks you, for example, to plough through before you get to where the edit field you're actually looking for to put in your book title or whatever. A good thing about not having to use the screen, I've copied an idea. I must confess that I got this from my colleague and I was very scornful at first. Because you don't need to see the screen, it means that you can use a remote keyboard. This is what I do at home. I use a remote keyboard and I've got like a little transmitter plugged into the headphone socket out from the speakers, and it means that I can use the thing anywhere in the house. Now, even more than me, my colleague kind of lives and loves this stuff, and he was like listening to electronic books in bed almost every night, and he had to stop that because it was starting to cause like marital disharmony. It was quite a problem. I haven't got that far with it, but it does mean that I can. It does mean that I can use the computer anywhere in the house, and that's fantastic. So I can slob it out on the settee and still use the system. But it's all keyboard and it's speech out. I've got a braille display at home, an old one. I'm lucky to have that. It's very expensive technology. It's this immediate braille output from the computer, but I'm lucky enough to have it because there was a device that I no longer needed for my work. It was kind of obsolete. But if I tell you that, it's probably not been switched on for kind of 5 months, the braille display, because it's mainly speech that I use. The fact that it's quicker, it's only if you're using lots of figures. You bet your life that the screen reader, if you're looking at phone numbers, the screen reader will carefully interpret into millions, thousands, and hundreds. And if you're trying to look at hundreds and thousands, it will give you all the digits. So you've got to try and work out how many digits there were, so you can actually decide whether you're talking about millions or not. So you'll do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So then a braille display is useful, but mainly it's synthetic speech. Having access to the internet has been an absolutely fantastic thing for me. I'm a gadget freak, you see. So my dad it used to be that my dad would read. My dad got me into all this. He used to read me stuff out of the sort of Saturday and Sunday papers. You know the sort of nose hair trimmers and all that sort of stuff. But then sadly when he died, I had no access for a while to this kind of information. But now with the internet, here it all is again. And it's not just the silly things like that I use it for either. It's totally turned around the shopping experience for me. If you think about it, I suppose one example would be, let's see, one of our board we recently need to replace our dishwasher. I don't know much about dishwashers really. I chuck the stuff in there and I put it on, but I didn't know what varies between dishwashers. So first of all, I could go onto the internet, I could look at the features just as anybody else would, the kind of things that vary from one to the next. And then I could look at some models that seem to have, and I'm quite keen on the kind of, not using sort of too much power, the sort of economy and ecology and all the rest of it. So that kind of stuff, not using too much water, all that, and I could eventually find a model that satisfied me and then start finding a good price. What I would have to do previously would be going to a shop and say I want to buy a dishwasher, and the guy would say how much do you want to spend, and I'd say like 250, and he'd say well, we've got this wonderful one for 300, just a bit more than I mentioned. I might well be standing right next to one that was actually going to do everything I wanted it to for kind of 150. But I'd never know that. It's completely turned around the sort of shopping experience. If I want to buy a CD, I used to have to go into, no, they still call them record shops, I don't know. Anyway, I'd go into a record shop, the music would be banging away there. I'd try and persuade the guy to read me the track listing by a new artist, whilst I stood there trying to remember and trying to decide how many of the tracks I'd already got, and how many repeats there were, was it really worth me buying the new CD? So we'd go through all that, and I'd try and make my decision on that basis. But now with sites like Amazon, I can hear the music, I can do comparisons, I can look at the track listing, I can sort of compare the track listings against ones I've already, CDs I've already got. I can even hear samples of the music. It's a wonderful thing. It gives me information from both near and far. I've got a son of 11, and trying to find things to do with him in the school holidays is quite a sort of trial. What other people might do in their boroughs, I suppose they might go to the library and pick up leaflets. They'll see information about forthcoming events on posters on the park gates, things like that. Not accessible to me. And try to get him to do a bit of the research for himself, not interested, until the holiday comes along and he's bored sick. So the borough's website for information about what's going on close to me, but nevertheless hitherto entirely inaccessible to me. Now I can find out for him what's happening, and I can actually occupy some of the time. He still makes us say that he's bored, but at least I feel like I've done my bit. I fancy myself as a bit of a poet. I won't give you any poetry today, but it has meant but it has meant that I've been able to sort of enter poetry competitions, place my poetry on websites, in the States and all over the place. They've convinced me that I'm a great poet, and so that they can persuade me to put my poems in a book that only people in the book will buy, all that stuff. But at least I've been able to do that. It's been absolutely great. My son, the other day, the other day, he'd taken his bike to a bike shop to have the tyre mended. He couldn't remember the name of the bike shop. He wanted to know if the bike was ready yet, and we didn't want to go down there, especially in the rain, if it wasn't. So electronic yellow pages, we go on there, we look at the bike shops in the area. That's the one, he knows by the address, and we ring them up. Otherwise, that information without a name would have been difficult for me, and he'd have been grumbling about having to try and find out the information himself. And in the end, nothing would have happened. The bike would have stayed there for another week. That's just a few of the things that I would use the internet for. Some of the problems that I encounter then. Generally speaking, I love the internet experience. It's so damn useful to me. I get into trouble at home for spending so long on the computer. I do point out to my partner that I want to have been doing one thing. The internet will be some of it. So will writing letters. So will using my scanner to read a book or read my mail. So I've been up there for half an hour. I've probably been doing 6 different tasks, but as far as she's concerned, like I'm out of the way and it's on the computer. The alt tags one is the main problem I come across, the most annoying thing that happens to me. Now, the other day, the other month actually, I was looking on my favourites list, and suddenly I found your favourite porn sites and nude nurses. I thought, oh yeah, this is interesting. The only other person who's used this computer recently is my son and his mates. He's 11. And so I called him and said, what's all this then? I said, I know you can be pretty naughty sometimes, but I think you'd be so stupid actually to add this to my favourites list. He said, you probably did it yourself. I said, yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? I'd go onto the site and I'd get image, new nurse, wonderful. Actually, nothing to do with me at all. But if I wanted to do that, at least a nicely written description of a word or two might give you some interest. But he's now got his own PC, and when we were networking it, another problem we came across was I was doing this again. He hadn't got the patience to do it himself. He just wanted the effect at the end of it. He just wanted to be able to use the PC at the end of it. We got to a stage where the thing was just saying button, and we had pictures of buttons with no text on them. 1 in the morning, he's asleep, my partner's asleep, nothing I can do about it, and we're into the process. So annoying. So we're really nearly there, but we can't actually do it. Other things that have happened recently, I've just kind of brainstormed the problems that I have really. Security codes. You can go all through a process, and you're about to buy something, and then it says, please type the figures that are in red into the box below. You can't find the box or the figures in red. For some reason, the thing won't read them to you. In some cases, there have been innovative solutions to that one, and I was looking at a site the other day where there was actually a WAV file which read out the code to me, and I could find the box okay. That was good. It was a bit frustrating because my good old the PC I use at work is like it's quite an old one, and it's a single channel sound card, so I was having to turn the screen reader on and off to be able to hear this code, but we did it anyway. Some effects of Java, it's worth researching how you use Java. Some effects of Java are still a problem. I had a guy in the other day in the resource centre demonstrating to him. He was a retired gynaecologist actually, but he still wanted to be able to attend the dinners and so on. I got him all enthused about the internet. And I said, right, well, let's do a search. It's always a bit of a dodgy thing to do, but it is, if it works, it is the thing that really kind of excites people. We got onto the sort of the College of Gynaecologists site, and we were looking at it, and the sort of JAWS said, please use the menus. Please use the menus to navigate, the side menus to navigate. Those didn't speak at all. And it's then actually quite difficult to pick up the session again and to convince the guy it's all worthwhile. I don't know whether we managed it or not, really. That was sad. The hover overs still aren't working, where you get like with screen readers, where you place the mouse over a particular link, and suddenly a whole load of other information and options are presented to you. That doesn't work. All the screen reader will speak is the link still currently. Work's going on that, but it's not been done yet. It's very frustrating. Now I don't know that's happened, of course. I say, well, this page told me it was going to say so and so, and I ask my son or my partner, and they say, oh, well, I can find it. That's because there's the hover over. Too many links sometimes can be a problem. You tend to use that when you've got this slightly slower access method. You tend to use the links as a sort of overview feature, really. And just kind of whack your way through the links. If there are sort of 500 of them and you're looking for something in particular, you've got a problem. There is a find that you can do. The screen reader offers you a find thing. You've got to know the particular words, keywords that the site designer has used to be able to find what you're looking for. So that can be quite frustrating. Very complex layouts. We had some people who were trying to design an electronic form for Inland Revenue actually, and they came along and showed us this site. They said this conforms perfectly to all the guidelines. Can you fill in this electronic form? I couldn't actually do it because there were too many. It's the same kind of difficulty that you have, I think, if you're looking at the form yourself. If no, then please refer to so and so, and if yes, then please. But hearing all that in this sort of linear string and not being able to glance around. I sort of did it, but it was very, 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 very slow. So just to think about the kind of effect you get with a single word string. Pop-ups drive me mad. There are things you can do about that, but they are very annoying. Some people don't have the technology that will do that, or they don't know how to do it, how to get rid of them. I get annoyed with anything that wastes my time. You know, when I got to the stage where I want to pay for something, this is really so you can really see my sort of buying gadget thing coming through here. Anyway, I want to pay for something. You know, you've got a sort of enforced questionnaire before it let you get that far. Sometimes there's a skip questionnaire link or whatever, but very often there isn't when they want all this marketing information about you, and that's just kind of wasting my time. And sometimes they won't let you actually avoid it. Oh yeah, PDFs. There are ways now of dealing with PDFs, but still there are problems about the security settings for many documents. It's annoying that the access technology often can't cope with them when the security settings won't allow it to. That still happens quite a lot. So you can find exactly the page that what looks like from your search engine and the little snippet you get from the result, that particular search result, exactly like what you're looking for, but you can't actually. But it's a PDF that security settings won't let you into. It's frustrating and just so annoying when you've probably done a fair amount of trawling through. You've probably done a fair amount of trawling through using search engines, and you can imagine that that's where it feels slowest of all. You know, when you've tried to be clever with your refining your search, but it still says like 2,100 and something results. So it can be very frustrating when you get a search result. You get in there, you think, from the little snippet I'll get here, this looks exactly like what I want, and then some of the things I've been talking about just like prevent you actually getting to the information you want. You feel angry, sort of disappointed, And just like you wanna right then find, if you could only find the mail to, you'd tell them, you tell the people, look, you're missing the trick here. I'm somebody else who wanted to buy something from you, or wanted the information you're trying to let the world have. There's just a few small things you should have done that would have made this easier for me. It's clearly a matter of like education. It's a matter of letting people know that it's worthwhile, principally. But I mean, finally, it would just be like a sort of call to action and encouragement for anybody here who goes on and does this kind of work. And I don't know quite how our audience is made up today. I mean, the message is you don't have to produce dull, old, sort of dull, text-heavy sites. We have to be a bit careful within RNIB, because as Julie was sort of saying there, I mean, for example, we've got one person who finds the Archimedes an extremely effective way of accessing the internet. She wants us to form a user group for the Archimedes. We can't find anybody else to join it, but that's what she wants us to do. So we have to design so that she can use the system. She's one of our committee members. She's very sort of vocal. So we have a special problem, but generally speaking, there's no need to make this sort of decision between like sites that look good and sites that sound good. It's not that kind of split at all, and it's worth studying the guidelines to find that out and confirm that for yourselves. Do just remember, think about the figures that Julie was giving you there. Just remember people like myself who are like, sort of tapping away there sort of during the night quite often, trying to get the information out. Going to be dead pleased, dead chuffed. I never forget the fact that some years ago I'd have had no way of getting any access at all to much of the information, to the vast majority of the information I now get back from the internet. Just remember that, and just do whatever you can to implement this stuff. We're aware of the pressures on people to be, the most innovative, unusual sort of designer going. But just remember this stuff, please, and remember also that if you've got an effect that you want to be able to use and it isn't clear from the guidelines whether it's going to work or not, there are sources of advice around, sort of particularly from RNIB, but there are other people as well who will advise about sometimes about compromises, workarounds, ways around. And I think finally, just like we're always pleased that people are interested enough to come to a session like this, and just take it with you, carry it with you when you go, really. Okay.
Thanks. Would you mind if I show people? Ian, could you get my slides back up, and then we'll just continue the show just very down. I thought you might be interested, but please take care of it, otherwise you will pay for it. To have a look at the little machine. Mark was reading from notes there, and a little machine he has. Like probably some of you have got Palms, PDAs. Well, this is kind of the equivalent that Mark uses. It's called a Braille Light, and it has a Braille display, which is raised and tactile, and Mark types in on the keys there. Can I pass it to you? Great thing. I'll do the rest over there. I appreciate we're being filmed and I keep moving around, which probably isn't terribly helpful. I've got on the screen, we just heard from Mark obviously, I've got on the screen a picture of another colleague of mine called Parish, and Parish is an information officer at RNIB and also uses computers and uses the internet a great deal. And Parish isn't blind, he's partially sighted, and so Parish has got enough vision to see the screen, but he needs to have the text much bigger and needs to be able to control the colour and the contrast and the style of the font. So Parish is using an ordinary computer again. The only difference is it's got some additional software on there called screen magnification that enables him to manipulate the layout of the screen in the way that he needs. Parish also uses, I'm sure he can touch type, but just so you know it's available, and we've got one here, it's possible to get a computer keyboard with large print keys that just make it a bit easier for people to be able to use them. So we've got one of those here that you're welcome to come and have a little look at later if you'd like to do that. Okay, actually I'm going to wander around here because it's easier for me. So we've talked a lot about people with disabilities using the internet, but it's very much worth mentioning, I think, that there are at least 4 big groups of people who don't have disabilities, certainly not in the, the traditional sense, but share common kind of requirements as people with disabilities when it comes to using the internet. And here they are. First of all, people with basic literacy. There are 7 million adults in the UK who only have very basic literacy skills, and so who will greatly benefit from websites that use their plain, straightforward English. I can't say enough times how important that is. Don't use, fancy, complicated text just to, show off. Please just keep it as plain as possible. It's much better for people. Also, people with basic numeracy. This is an interesting one, as there's quite a lot of synergy between people with basic numeracy and people who are blind. And if you take the example of a complex timetable or complex graphs or charts, I think we probably here all take it for granted that we can read a bus timetable, find out what time the next bus is coming. That's because we're kind of good at numeracy and we're able to do that cross-referencing quite successfully. But lots of people don't have that skill. And timetables are the main reason, or lack of access to timetable information, we found is the main reason why blind and partially sighted people don't travel, because not knowing what time the next bus is going to be. When it comes to representing that information on the web, if you've got a complex table, it is, yes, possible to mark up a table that can help a screen reader out, but it's still a bit of a chore. So it's really helpful where you have timetables or charts or statistical tables, pie charts, to provide a text overview of what it is that the chart is trying to communicate as a paragraph of text. Makes it much easier for the screen reader to deal with it, and it's also much better for people whose numeracy skills are quite basic. There's also synergy with people whose first language isn't English, because when you're making text available in plain English, and if you've got transcripts of your audio, as we said earlier, helps those people out. And finally, people who lack access to broadband. Accessible websites are fast to download, they can be comprehended without graphics being switched off. We're becoming a much more broadband-enabled nation, but I travel the world from time to time, speaking to people who do my job in different countries. And I was speaking to a lady from Australia who does a similar job to my own, and she was telling us that accessible web design is a real boon for Australian sheep farmers who only have dial-up access to the web, and their premises are surrounded by electric fence, and whenever a cow touches the fence, the internet connection goes down. So it's very useful to have websites that are accessible, therefore download quickly. It really helps those people. Actually, Ian, would you mind clicking my slides on for me? I seem to keep gravitating over this direction for some reason. So accessibility then. Yes, it is about people with disabilities, as we've discovered, but it's broader than that. It's about all people using all technology in all circumstances. So that's people with any disability, people with low literacy, numeracy, people whose first language is in English, people in rural areas who don't have broadband. It supports device independence. That means any technology, any platform can get at your content, and any version of any browser should be able to get content out if you've applied to WI's guidelines. And I also point out, because it's important not to forget, the 20-something middle-class, able-bodied, highly literate, city-dwelling, English-speaking technocrats, of which I'm assured there are some. And accessible design is good for you also, because it embraces everybody. Can we move on again? I wanted to make just very quickly a distinction for you, if you're really into this stuff, between accessibility and usability, because they're not the same. I mean, some people will use the phrases as if they're interchangeable, but they're not. Instead, they're two sides of the same coin. Accessibility is about following technical guidelines, the WAI's guidelines, to make sure any person using any technology in any circumstance can get into your website. But it doesn't mean that Mark would be able to find what he's looking for, complete a transaction confidently within a reasonable time. That's usability. That's about the user experience. And the two really are hand in hand. And I would go as far as to say that if you're going to make your website accessible following the WAI guidelines, but you don't then test it for usability, then you're wasting your time, and you might as well not do anything for accessibility, because the two are linked. And if you take the supermarket analogy, you make a supermarket accessible to someone who's disabled by having ramps ramps for wheelchair access, or disabled parking bays near the door, grab rails, that kind of thing. Yeah, that gets the person into the store, but it doesn't help them find the loo paper or the milk or anything. That's usability and the layout of the store and having staff on hand to help, etc., etc. So the two things are very, very different, but kind of mutually supporting. Can we move on again, yeah? Right, I talked to a lot of businesses about this to convince them that accessible design is something that they need to practice. So there's lots of reasons for doing this, not just that it's a good thing to do, but there's also a strong and strengthening business case. And also there's a legal case as well that I'll talk about in a moment. But just very basically, accessible design is good for business because, well, it increases reach to disabled customers. So we've already said the government estimates there's 8.6 million people with disability in the UK. The source says the Disability Rights Commission, but we know that that's a very modest figure. We know that it's far, far more than that. The Employers Forum on Disability, the EFD, has said that 1 in 4 people has a disability or has a close friend or relative who is disabled. Now, why does that matter? Well, you can imagine, I have MS and Mark is blind, and if we had a bad experience at the hands of your company, we would tell each other and we'd tell everybody that we know, and then they wouldn't want to use your company either. That's kind of how it works. So powerful sphere of influence surrounds us. It also increases your reach to older customers. Now, many of those big 4 impairments that I described, trouble seeing, trouble hearing, loss of manual dexterity, and also cognitive impairments, tends to characterise conditions that we might acquire as we grow older. And we're in an ageing population. Age Concern have said that already there are 10.7 million older people in the UK. But by 2010, the Employers Forum on Disability says that 40% of the UK population will be aged over 45, the age at which the incidence of those types of disability begin to increase significantly. Now, I don't say that to frighten you. When you acquire something like, I had MS when I was 19, which was kind of young to have something like that. But, you know, what makes it most scary when you lose your sight is it's your loss of independence. It's having to rely on other people for stuff. But when I was 19, we didn't have the web, so now things will probably be kind of different. But the technology can support our changing bodies. The technology is better than that. But what it's absolutely reliant on is those of you who create content for technology to follow the guidelines, follow the de facto standards to make sure the technology will still work for us. Basically, you can stop me working if you don't design accessible sites, because if I can't read the web anymore, I can't really do my job. It basically comes down to that. We also point out that practicing accessible web design increases reach to existing and potential employees, because many people advertise their jobs on their website, so it's important that people with disabilities can read them. And also, it's so crucial that any intranets are accessible. Otherwise, how are any visually impaired employees going to be able to use your main tool of communication within the company? Can we move on again? It's also good for business to practice accessibility, because it just increases the reach of your content and your services to everybody. These are the things I've listed up here that are really the stuff of accessibility and good web design. Clear and consistent navigation, legible, clear, understandable content, device independence, text transcripts make content more widely available, improve your search engine, this thing by having lots of text up there, and that's good for everybody. None of those things listed there are going to spoil the experience of somebody who doesn't have a disability. There's more about this if you're interested in knowing more on the WAI's website at w3.org/WAI. And just to give you a bit of a real-world example, one of the major projects that I've done over the past few years has been with Tesco, a company I'm sure you're all familiar with. It was quite a hard sell, really, because at that time, well, and indeed now, Tesco were the biggest, most profitable, actually in profit, e-commerce company in Europe. And then they had me on the phone saying, you're doing it wrong, you need to sort it out, you know, what's problems? And, who is this woman who's telling us we're doing it wrong? So I was having a chat with Tesco on the phone about all of this, and I said, look, it's probably best if you come in and see us, really. So Tesco came, and this was really a legendary meeting, and Tesco sat down with Mark, actually, in front of the computer, and Tesco watched as Mark was unable to put even a single item into his Tesco shopping basket because of the way that the site had been designed. Now this was a few years ago, this was 1999-2000 when we were working with Tesco. And Tesco in fact turned around to me and said, you know, this isn't just really embarrassing. Clearly we're in breach of the law here, come to that in a moment, but also this breaks with our own internal message as a company that we're number one for customer. And clearly we're not number one for at least 2 million of our potential blind and partially sighted customers, so we're going to sort this out. What Tesco decided to do at that time was to do their own internal research to work out how they could help blind people to achieve what Tesco call the 15-minute rule. But when you're using a site like Tesco.com, you're kind of being timed by the company, and they expect you to fill your basket with 12 items and check out within 15 minutes, otherwise they have failed you. So they were trying to find a way to do this without slowing everybody down, and Tesco felt, or their marketing department I think felt, that the graphical cues that were in a sense slowing down some people to try and help them purchase more weren't at all helpful to a visually impaired person's experience of using the site. So they came up with a separate interface for visually impaired people that's called tesco.com/access, which is driven by all the same back ends, so it's absolutely the same content. And in fact that takes a heck of a lot of money. Every sighted person I've introduced to it finds it easier and better to use. It was designed by 120 blind people, incidentally, so there you go. Certainly not me because I live by myself, but apparently the average Tesco customer spends on average £85 per shopping trip on Tesco.com. And if you times that by the 2 million blind and partially sighted people, if every visually impaired person did their Christmas shopping on the site, that would be £170 million for Tesco from one shop. The R&D and the implementation of the interface that Tesco did cost 35k, which is a very small fraction of the potential revenue in that case. But what was also very exciting was that all the work they did on this provided a very strong research and development steer on Tesco's offering to the interactive television, ITV platform, and it's also the interface they use in Korea when Tesco moved into that market. So I think they're quite pleased with us. Can we move on again? Just to tell you a little bit about the law, this is the main area that I'm engaged with at the moment as a policy officer. I'm asked every day, you know, does our website have to be accessible by the law? Are we breaking the law if our site's not accessible? Well, yes, your site does have to be accessible according to the law, and the piece of legislation is the 1995 Disability Discrimination Act. Now, the Act has come into place incrementally, and the part of the Act that's pertinent to websites and services is the Section 21 that's about access to goods, facilities and services. Now that part of the Act came into effect on the 1st of October 1999, so it's already been in place for a while, and it puts a requirement on service providers to make reasonable adjustments to make sure that someone with a disability can use the service. So it's really not about home pages, personal web pages. It's really not about that. It's great if you can make your pages accessible to everyone, of course. But in terms of the law, this is really about banks, supermarkets, the government, you know, providing a service via the public platform that is the web. It's reliant on case law, the DDA, which means a person with a disability needs to take a case, and a body of case law will be built up. If you look at the law itself, if you look at the Act, you won't find any mention of web within it, because legislation is never that specific. However, in February of 2002, the Disability Rights Commission published a code of practice to accompany the Act that does explicitly mention websites as being covered by the Act, and it gives an example of an online airline ticket booking service as an example. We'd already thought that at RNIB, it just kind of proved it. There had been no activity in the courts until a couple of months ago. In July of 2003, RNIB, that's us, we took a couple of cases using the law. Now it's very important to say that we don't sort of threaten companies with the law. We would only ever use the law as a very last resort. In my role as like an advocacy officer, if you like, if a blind person comes to me and rings me up and says, I found a website that I can't use, I want you to sue the company, the first thing thing that they do daily. The first thing I would do is find out what technology the blind person is using. Because here's Mark with the very latest kit, but many people, perhaps don't have the latest kits. And if they're using a 6-year-old, I mean, Mark talks about an Acorn Archimedes user, that's not reasonable. The blind person has to be using the latest version of kit. So we have a conversation about that, and if their kit is old, then we talk about upgrading that. If the blind person is using technology that's nice and up to date, we then delicately find out if they know how to use it properly, because this is specialised software, and blind people need a 3 days training to get to grips with it. Now, in a way to help with that, we've worked with the British Computer Association of the Blind to create a scheme called BTCS, which is the British Computer Association of the Blind Technology Certification Scheme, I think it stands for, which is a certificate that companies who train blind people in how to use tech can apply for to make sure that blind people are receiving quality training in how to use this technology. So if we're sure the blind person's got the right kit and know how to use it, then we look at the website. And it's a very simple matter for our RNIB to establish whether it's a problem with the way the site is designed. What will then happen is I and the blind customer will write to the company responsible for the website, who owns the website, not necessarily the designers, to say there is a problem here, this is what the problem is, can you sort it out? And we do that via the website. Now that never works. I don't know if you ever tried emailing anybody via their website, but it usually ends up in customer services who just don't know what to do about it, and you get back a very standard message saying, thank you for your inquiry, your feedback is very important to us, blah blah. Then I'll usually write back and say, yes, thanks, but will you read the message I sent you? If I don't hear back from them, I then do a standard letter to their CEO, and that always has the desired effect, and gets passed down to the relevant person, and then we enter into a dialogue which involves RNIB explaining to the company what the problem is, because the company doesn't know necessarily how a blind person uses their website. So we explain the problems, we suggest solutions, and then we talk about a time frame for sorting it out. And it's only if we really don't get anywhere useful at that point that I would then pass the matter on to our legal advocacy team, who might issue county court proceedings. And in fact, we got that far twice so far this year, in July, and one case was subject to county court proceedings. In both instances, the case is settled before they reach court, which was great, because that means problems are now solved in those 2 cases. But we wait to see. But as I say, often in the press it's represented as I spend all day circling the web for sites to prosecute. I don't. I'm here, coming out talking to people. But that's the reality. Education is not covered by the DDA. It's a separate piece of legislation. The 2001 Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Act, SENDA, and that covers academia. If you want to know more about this, myself and a couple of lawyers have written an article, Website Design and the DDA. That's available on our website, the address coming up at the end. This is quite an exciting year for us in 2003. 2003 is the European Year of People with Disabilities, and to coincide with that, the Disability Rights Commission is conducting a formal investigation, capital F, capital I, into web accessibility. Now this again has been very misrepresented or misreported in the press. The DRC is not looking at 1,000 websites and then going to prosecute any that are inaccessible. The DRC is looking at 1,000 websites across different genre, finding out what the accessibility problems are, seeing how good the guidance is that RNIB and WAI are issuing. And at the end of the year we'll have a snapshot on accessibility and some guidance on what kind of tools and resources the web design community needs to make websites more accessible. There's a website address up on the screen, which I won't read out, but you'll get it when you get a copy of the presentation, that tells you all about that. Can we move on again, Ian? And making your website accessible is just a good thing to do. It's good for business, it supports multiple technologies, it's very strongly linked with usability, there is a legislative framework, but also it just makes the world a better and a more diverse place to be, more inclusive. The world is better when you have people with different skills and different experiences all in together. As Mark's also illustrated perfectly, it helps people to be more independent. For Mark to sort out some activities for his son on holiday, should that really be such a bloody struggle and a big deal to do? Of course it shouldn't. The web makes that very possible for It gives people more choice and more opportunity. Again, think what Mark was saying about buying the dishwasher. To have access to all of the product information. Is it fair to say, Mark, you've spent a significant amount of money at QVC since you've used their website? I think
You know
it's
it
fair.
too well, yes.
Yes. Because of the descriptions of products. You know, when you go shopping and you're blind, you don't have an assistant who will tell you. I mean, wasn't it right, Mark, once you went to the supermarket and you wanted to buy your Sunday roast, but the assistant who was taking you around was vegetarian and wouldn't take you near the meat freezer?
That they didn't want to handle the meat.
I mean, can you imagine? The web, you know, gets rid of all of these problems. It makes the world more democratic. For people who find it difficult to get out to vote at the polling booth, we're working with the government to make voting online more accessible. It's also a great way for companies to demonstrate their corporate social responsibility, which is a real biggie for companies at the moment. It's a really public way to show that they're inclusive and open and welcoming to people with disabilities. Can we move on again? Thanks, Ian. So finally, what we're asking people to do when we speak to web designers and to companies who are responsible for putting services onto the web is to practice accessible web design. That means implementing the WAI guidelines, but also practice web usability, even if you only get one person to test your website that wasn't involved in creating it, and probably no more than 8 people. That will give you all you need to work out any usability anomalies. Engage with and listen to your users. Even if you design a website following all of these great guidelines, you might still launch and you get very angry, blind person on the phone. Well, you'd feel angry too if you felt you were being discriminated against. But just have a conversation, because it might be that that person doesn't know how to use their tech properly. Or it might be, and how many banking sites have I seen where it's lack of alternative text on the proceed button that is stopping somebody from pushing forward and using the site. So be open to having a dialogue. Involve R&IB if you like, because the blind person doesn't necessarily know how to articulate the difficulty they're having, and people at your end might not necessarily understand about the technology. We do, so get us involved and we can help. Don't be afraid to involve us. Remember that web technology is always progressing. Back in '98, I did a piece of work with the BBC to create a program called Betsy, BBC Education Text-to-Speech Internet Enhancer, to create text versions of the BBC site on the fly, because the BBC site was very inaccessible. But since that time, the WAI's guidelines were created, so we don't bother with the Betsy thing anymore. So things are moving forward. This is all about championing emerging standards, adopting multimodal approaches, future-proofing your content, and also enjoying it and understanding that it is a highly creative opportunity. I think when I met Ian, we were at a Macromedia sponsors event, and I'm always very interested in what Macromedia are doing and what Flash are doing, what they're doing with Flash, and are they making it more accessible. And to test what they were doing, I took the latest version of Flash earlier this year, and on the 14th of February this year, I created an accessible game, fully accessible and dynamic multimedia game called RLIB Blind Date. Only I would dare, really. And it's available online if you want to jot down the address and have a look at it. It's all in Flash. It's been designed in such a way that it's accessible, but it doesn't look like it is. It will work with a screen reader. Screen reader will cut in between the audio that's already there, and it works beautifully. It's at rlibblinddate.mensa.com. Could you just get the final slides up, Ian, and then we're just going to change to something slightly different just to finish. These are our contact details, because we would like you to contact us, particularly if you're going to go on and do any projects based on this kind of area, which I hope that you do. Those are our details. I'm the Digital Policy Development Officer, julie.howell@rlib.org.uk. I'm based at RLIB in Peterborough, in Cambridgeshire. And Mark is, let's say, high-tech officer, but it's much more wordy than that. And Mark's at mark.prowse@rlib.org.uk. Everything we've talked about is at rlib.org.uk/web access centre. Ian, could we get the other laptop up now? What I wanted to do is just to give you the opportunity to see Mark using the internet and see what it's like, because it's easy to think, oh, it's all horribly difficult, and oh, it must all be very slow. So what I've asked Mark to do is really use it the way that he uses it. Quite often what we'll do for sighted people is really slow things down and make it all easy, but let's not do that. Let's just use it in the usual the way that you do. I'll join you up here, Mark. Okay, there's the key. My hand's on the keyboard now.
Thank you. So we're kind of carrying on where the video left off really, with just a little demonstration of this access technology.
Okay, they've got on the screen what you've got in front of your screen, so they can see. If we go into the RNIB homepage as a starter.
Need a bit more volume
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Sorry,
Mark, can you step back a bit? 'Cause
Sorry,
we need to go
you need to get down there. Try that.
Escape.
That's better.
RNIB Internet. Ravensburg College. RNIB homepage. Enter.
So it's all going to be keyboard stuff, and you can either hear the page at a run, which when we get in there we'll be able to do, I think.
I have to say, this isn't live on the internet, these are
Page
cached
has
pages.
52 links. RNIB Internet homepage link. RNIB home. Graphic. RNIB helping you live with sight loss. Graphic helping you live with sight loss. Link tips for screen reader users. Link jump to page content. Link jump to search. Link jump to site tools. Site.
So you can hear it at a run like that, or you can go through and sort of manually get all the sort of blank lines and headings and links and everything by using the cursor keys. You can cursor down.
Link, jump to new link, what's new vertical, link, sitemap vertical bar.
And if we get to sort of blank lines and things,
Link, graphic,
etc. Or we can just go through the links. I was talking about using, excuse me, using the links as an overview. We can use the tab key, and these incidentally you can try some of these, because these incidentally these aren't keystrokes that we've used so far that are anything to do with the screen reader. They're Microsoft keystrokes. One very good thing that Microsoft has done. It's put in lots of useful keystrokes here. We can tab through the links.
Tab, tips for screen reader users link.
It's announcing all the hyperlinks there.
Tab, jump to page content link. Tab, jump to search link. Tab, jump to site tools link.
And all of these things will work. Searches will work. As I say, that there are keystrokes that will enable you to zap to input fields. There are keystrokes that will take you to a run of text. Those are the sort of latter two or three are things to do with speeding up access and are to do with the screen reader. Anything particularly to look at
tell
here?
you what, Mark, should we go to the BBC site and then really speed it up to the level that you would use it at? That was
Step 4, list view, RNIB, BBC News, BBC, homepage.
speech is very slow
Enter.
at the moment for our benefit, really. But if you crank it right up to how you would usually use, I think that'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit too slow like that. So
Page
you can.
has one frame with one
We'll
output.
get it
BBC.
reading. We'll give it a bit of sort of more realistically how you would work with it.
BBC News vertical bar news. BBC News vertical bar news front page. Link skip to main content. Visit link BBC site. Link categories. Link TV. Link radio.
That's-
link communicate.
That's
link
about how I would
link
use it.
search,
But I've got a
link
colleague who he really does. He really does. I've got a colleague who uses it like that. I'm not that smart. It's my old ears, and especially at the moment with Qatar, I can't pick it out at that speed. But a much more usable pace.
BBC News vertical bar news front page. Link skip to main content. Visited link BBC site. Link categories. Link TV. Link radio. Link communicate. Link web.
All works well. The
communicate.
only problem with this one is the site is so huge, really. Particular things to look at.
But with the speed, I think it's as when we read things, we scan with our eyes and we look at patterns and we pick up patterns of words. That's why it's very helpful to always type in sentence case, not all in capitals, because then that pattern is lost. Similarly, Mark and other blind people who use this technology all the time recognise words by patterns, by hearing them, and so that people really do listen to it at that speed. My boss is blind and does listen to it at that very fastest speed, and it's fine because he can listen to confidential emails, quite possibly about me when I'm sitting there next to him in his office and I'm none the wiser because my brain is not tuned in and I can't tell. So yeah, that was the BBC. BBC site works pretty well. We've done a lot of work with the BBC to make sure that they're using the descriptions on the images so that blind people are not going to be missing out on the content that's there. I wanted to get up something kind of random to see how it would work. So can you get up the Jennifer Lopez.
Alt F4, list with J, Jennifer Lopez, home page.
Not sure what we're taking on here. Okay.
Enter.
Screen reader's now going to sing. Actually, I don't think it is.
Ooh, it is.
Oh, that's interesting. It is.
Toolbar, premium toolbar.
Where is she?
So what you'll notice here is Mark saying to me, is she there? Is she there?
HTML,
We
list of
know,
alt
because
tab,
we've seen her
Jennifer
come up on the
Lopez,
screen.
Microsoft Internet.
Mark's not
Toolbar,
guessing anything.
Toolbar frame universal toolbar. Link Sony Music. Combo box featured artists go button.
So combo
Link
box is
graphic
what the
text.
system calls a drop
Link
down
graphic
list.
shop. Link graphic phone. Link graphic join. Link graphic win. Link graphic label. Toolbar frame end. Splash frame Jennifer Lopez image map link Jennifer. Image map link www.jenniferlopez.co.il. Image map link Jennifer Lopez. Image map link Joe. Image map link site. Image map link Jennifer Lopez. Image map link Jennifer Lopez / index 2. Image Jennifer Lopez period.
So you're not really getting a very helpful stream of, it all seems to be the same, doesn't it? Things could have been described better. I mean, what we're getting, Mark, is one sort of central image of Jennifer. It'd be quite nice to know she was there and to know what she was wearing and how she looked, because that's what we're getting, and a signature where she's kind of got her name alongside it. Instead, you're getting an awful lot of chatter eventually, but nothing that was particularly useful to you then, which is quite a common experience, I guess.
Not useful links at all. It's just a lot of her name. We don't really know where these links are going to go.
Yeah. The final one to look at, just because I think it's probably interesting for you, is a site you're probably very familiar with, which is your own college's website.
Alt F4,
What I've
list
done
view.
with this is I've downloaded it with the images switched off,
R. Ravensburg College,
because for Mark
home
makes
page.
no difference
Enter.
if the images are on or off. Obviously you can't see them.
Page has 25 links. Ravensburg College of Design and Communication, London, UK. Table with 2 columns and 2
Just hear
rows.
it
Graphic
run.
Ravensburg. Graphic College of Design and Communication, London, UK. Graphic art. Graphic programs. Link contact us. Link fax. Link help. Link disclaimer. Graphic image. Table and link pre-degree. Link undergraduate. Link postgraduate. Link services for business. Link read about Ravensburg graduate lead graduate.
Seems alright, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty good. So as you see on the screen, well, though we've turned the images off, you can read the alternative text which has been programmed in, and that's what Mark is hearing. So he's able to hear all the different kinds of information that are there. And if he was coming to your website, or if any visually impaired prospective student was coming, they would be able probably to move quite successfully through the site and click onto the different things, having a much better experience.
Seems fine. I think there's one image there.
There was one without.
It was
Quite
pretty
yeah,
damn good, I reckon.
Yeah, like there's an image there that's got image as the alternative text. What you can do as a convention is, if the image has no information or value, no function, is you can program it to be what you call null alt text, which is 2 sets of double quotes, and then the screen reader will just skip over it. So we just wanted to do that for you, really, just to give you an idea that it is possible, and that's the way that someone like Mark, who's blind, is able to use your website. I think we're going to finish here, but just hand over to you. Did the brow lights come round? Is that it there? Have you found that interesting to have a look at that high-tech equipment? But we're very happy to take any questions from you if you have any, and thank you so much for being interested and for listening.
Any questions, anyone?
Even if they're stupid, please ask them anyway.
How long did it take you to become that familiar with the software?
It's the thing is that the effects being used on the internet change over time. You can see I'm hedging, can't you? You can see the effects being used change over time as well. I reckon coming to this, we sell. Part of my role is sort of selling systems to people, and we see them become reasonably proficient with the internet. It does take, to basically learn the sort of screen reading keystrokes is easy enough. That's probably a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of sort of training, and someone who hasn't used the computer at all before, probably about sort of 5 days. But learning all the kind of workarounds and the jargon and and all of that, and some of the slightly more obscure keystrokes that will save you trouble. I reckon that's a matter of like months. It took me the truth of the answer is, I mean, I've sort of developed with the screen reading software, really, haven't I? So it's I suppose I'm the wrong person to ask, I guess, but I've been using this for sort of 6 years or so to get to this point. As I said earlier on, I'm still sometimes flummoxed. Not so often these days, in all fairness, but we reckon a matter of months to get good at it, even though you can basically learn the keystrokes quite quickly. But to get a real feel for it takes longer.
Mark's very much at a high-techy end of things, I would say. Mark's a super user. What we're trying to achieve through our various lobbying work at RNIB is for the technology companies that make the solutions to also make them easier to use, because at the moment I think we've quite successfully got the visually impaired people who are really interested in the IT to adopt it, but what about all of the others? Interesting thing in our campaigning, I suppose, with my remit being digital, computer ownership amongst blind and partially sighted people is 11%. Ownership of a television is 94%, and of a telephone is 97%. So we're getting quite into IVR, using the telephone as a means of accessing the web using voice recognition and speech synthesis, because it's still using your content, make it accessible to the phone. The television is an interesting one, because digital television is not like analog television. It's a very different beast. It's a bit like a computer in the corner of the room. It's not like the telly that we're used to. So we're doing loads and loads of work at the moment with the broadcasting industry and the government to make it all more user-friendly. I think for many of us, although it sounds strange at this point, we're still pioneers with the technology, and the usability movement, I think, is a very powerful one. It's a very powerful thing to get involved in, because at the moment we seem to be at a stage where people who design the technology and design technology are considered the great and the good and not to be questioned. And there's a few agencies like RNIB who come in and question it and move it forward. And a lot of work I know that Mark has done has led to this technology being improved, because we do work with the various IT companies, and we work a lot with Microsoft and Adobe and Macromedia as well, don't we? As well as the screen reader developers to bring it forward. So I reckon ask that question to someone in 5 years' time, hopefully they'll say, oh, in a couple of days I've mastered it. That's what we hope we're heading towards.
Anyone else?
How does Macintosh compare to Microsoft when in support of the RNIB standard?
As far as access technology is concerned, it's a sad thing, because of course Macintosh has had available speech and built in very much longer than Windows and all the rest of it. But very little sort of development work has been done, and internet access for somebody using speech only is virtually impossible, unfortunately. The same development work hasn't gone in either here or where most of the work does happen in the States.
Something to point out is that RNIB is a UK organisation, so we don't have the remit, and we certainly don't have the money to lobby in the US, which is where most of the big IT companies are. However, in the US they've got stronger legislation for access to IT than we have in the UK. It's called Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, if you want to look at it. But there are strong lobbying movements in the US and in Australia as well. We keep in good contact with them, and we try and help and support them when we can, but we're kind of limited in a way. With the work I do with Macromedia and Adobe, I work very closely with their UK teams, who then feed it all back to their US counterparts, because it's mostly a sales presence in the UK. So I think for me, I suppose it's a bit frustrating, because only so far I can reach with the work that I do, because I'm bound by our UK remit. But I'm rest assured that there's lots of good work going on by different agencies like the National Federation of the Blind and the American Foundation for the Blind in the US. This stuff is going on. But it is absolutely the case that I'm sure people are continuing to lobby Apple very hard.
There's just the one screen reader called, I think it's called Outspoken. It hasn't had a great deal of development work.
No, but I think they've stopped developing Outspoken, haven't they?
It's around, but I don't think any more work goes on it at all now.
Yeah.
Question here?
Is Internet Explorer really the browser you use for the speech and texting? Could you use something like Opera or something like that?
Netscape Netscape is useful, it has some supporters, but the vast majority of people are using Internet Explorer, and it seems to work better.
Which may be, dare I say, on camera, relationship between the screen reader developers and Microsoft. I think is where the hooking is coming. It's like the accessibility of Flash now is very dependent on the relationship between Macromedia and Freedom Scientific, who develop JAWS, and GW Micro, who develop Windowise. It was JAWS, I think, that Mark just demonstrated, so those relationships are very important.
Should have said that JAWS is the screen reader. It stands for Jobs Access with Speech, JAWS. So that's the particular screen reader we were using here today.
And its particular versions work with particular versions, don't they? A particular version of JAWS and a particular version of Internet Explorer.
It's quite quite a complex one there, and we get asked it quite a bit, particularly as people will buy. This, unfortunately, the sad thing is that the software that makes all this possible, the screen reading software, is still fairly expensive, and it costs virtually the same amount of money as the PC itself does. So I think, for example, for a copy of JAWS that works with most of the Windows systems, operating systems in this country, it costs sort of £655 just to make it accessible. And if you want the version that works with NT 2000 and XP Professional, it's £785. So people, what I was going to say is people unfortunately they often don't upgrade, do they? Once they.
One thing, I mean, you gasp, and you're right to gasp at those figures. One of the things again that we're doing is lobbying government, because 75% of turn that around. If you're in work and you're blind, you get help to buy your technology through a scheme called Access to Work, where the government pays 80% and the employer pays the remaining 20%. However, if you're not in work, which 75% of visually impaired people aren't, then you don't have any help to get computer equipment, so you're really excluded. So we're lobbying the government at the moment, because there is a scheme called Motability that helps people with disabilities use their benefit money to go towards running a car, to set up a computability scheme to divert those funds to getting a computer equipment, but also training and support to keep on running a computer, which is absolutely crucial. So we're continuing to lobby the government. I mean, changes like that, we don't just ask them and they say yes. It takes a long time and a lot of input and resources from RLIB to get schemes like that taken up. Something I think in Denmark, all visually impaired people use the same version of JAWS because the government buys it for every blind person there. So it's a bit of a support dream, really, that everybody's using the same version of something, so you don't have this big legacy issue. If only we could have a similar kind of thing in the UK, it'd be a lot easier for everybody concerned, I think. But we'll keep the pressure on.
Say if you were doing a search on the internet to find content, would you use like yahoo.com, or would you use a special site that you know will have links for?
I use Google mostly,
Google.
as it happens. I mean, I don't use special. I don't use special ones. The great thing is there isn't any particular need to, because the screen reading stuff works well with quite a lot of with most of the existing ones. What I think you have to be, everyone has to do it, but what you have to be extra clever at, I think, if you're using this stuff, is about your refining your searches. I referred to it earlier on, didn't I? But my heart sinks. When I try to make the sessions we do for people who come into our resource centre, try to make them real by saying, what's your particular interest? What would you like to look for on here? And they say football. It goes like 75 million, 600,000, like results found. So it's about being, because you've got to. There's really then no alternative to kind of listening through the results you've got and the snippets that you get to try and tell you what sites you've got.
There's two sides to that, I guess. There's using appropriate metadata when you're creating websites and using it responsibly as well. And also, I think a key to the whole training thing is making sure people have adequate information mining skills. And of course, many people don't know that. And I don't think the government does enough to make the internet a useful and usable resource for people. I remember when Google first came along, and many of the visually impaired people I talk to much prefer it, because it's you can see. I mean, many of the sites that are the most successful are BBC, Amazon. They're all quite they're very usable sites for everybody and accessible. eBay, just done some work with them. Last Minute, google.com, the information is presented in such a way. I think Amazon's a really good example. You can get what you want to get out of there as quickly as possible, which is really what a website should be about, not making you stuck in there and really frustrated. So
it tends to pay off to use one particularly because you get to know it really well. You use Google, for instance, and you get lots of sponsored results, which might be interesting. Really good ones are the ones that precisely contain your search string. And so it's just a matter. I mean, an example of why it helps to get to know one and stick with it is I look for the word. I do a little search for the word "see" and see your results here is the last thing before the actual results that have come up, as opposed to the sponsored ones. So it's just knowing the little sort of tips. So you tend to, I guess everybody does actually. You tend to get one and just like stick with it,
Anyone else?
Can we flash?
You did that one, yeah. That's sometimes.
Yeah, with Flash the answer is sometimes. Macromedia have done a lot of work recently with the screen reader developers. That's Freedom Scientific and GW Micro are the big screen reader developers. Working with the MSAA, the Microsoft Active Accessibility Layer, to enable screen readers to be able to get the content out of Flash files. So yes, Flash is becoming more accessible. However, it depends on how the Flash is implemented. I don't think you can say that a Flash, I mean, I'm not a Flash programmer, but you can't say labelling all objects in Flash make it accessible. It's more, kind of subtle or complex than that. But we created the blind date game. Do have a look at that online because that's where we pushed it as far as we could. But I'm seeing Macromedia tomorrow. I see them very often to keep kind of pushing it and pushing it. Because although Flash, it's interesting to see what Jacob Nielsen, you know about the web usability chap, he used to say 99% of Flash is bad. Now he's on the Macromedia board and he doesn't say that. But he doesn't say that anymore. And because he feels that the problems with Flash when it comes to accessibility is a question of user education. And I don't think that's just people who are blind realising it's now more accessible. It's educating people who design with Macromedia products that they can make the content more accessible. So I'm hoping to be working more with Macromedia on educating the design community about how to design more accessible Flash experiences that make absolutely no difference to the physical look of the thing. Sometimes Flash just works for somebody who's sighted and it's better to do something different for somebody who doesn't use their vision. If it's an advert, for example, for a car, it might be best to show a Flash movie for a sighted person, but some text about the features of the car might be a better way of communicating those values and that information, and I don't think we should be afraid of saying that. Sometimes alternative methods are sometimes the best, so it's all a big area of exploration at the moment. If anybody, I don't know if you're doing projects, but if you have the opportunity to do anything about Flash and accessibility, it's very, very interesting at the moment because we don't know the answers on how far you can take it. So Macromedia, I'm sure, will be dead keen and working with you if you did want to do a student project because it's interesting stuff. It's getting there. I see improvements, but I think it's a bit slower than maybe we would all like.
Anyone else?
Many of those sites are database based, like content management system. Wouldn't it be easier to kind of build a very simple interface that relates to only the important data in a database behind, and to not try to put everything in one site? I mean,
certainly, I don't work, there is a part of R&D called the Web Accessibility Team that works with companies directly who are creating websites, and increasingly, as you say, sites are built using content management systems, so it's possible to put things in there, and indeed that is what's happening as sites become more complex. Mark's area is as a user really, mine is working on the policy saying, you need to make your websites accessible. What I can suggest is for questions like that, which are at the perimeter fence of my technical competence, which is why I don't really answer them very fully, is drop an email to webaccess@rnib.org.uk, who will give you a much better answer to that question than I possibly could. And also, if you have any technical questions about accessibility, such as, when is JavaScript a problem? Can we use JavaScript, or is it likely to cause problems? What sorts of problems would it use? What about CSS? How should we use that? webaccess@rnib.org.uk can answer all of your technical questions like that. So sorry to fob you off. That's the best I can give for that one. site that you come across, any site, just drop them an email and give them the website address rnib.org.uk/web access centre, and just make them aware. We're working as hard as we can to educate people and raise awareness. The ways that we do this are through talks like this. We go on tours. I've been on tour last year with Macromedia and Adobe to get to speak to their audiences. I speak about 3 times a week for the past 7 years at conferences, so people get to hear about us that way. We write in the national press, in the specialist press, do television and radio work. You know, we're doing all we can to raise awareness, but we still have limited resources at RNIB. So any opportunities you have to talk to people about accessibility, or just to direct people to our website with the information, is hugely appreciated. If they don't understand it, that's fine, they can come back to us, either to Mark or to myself. We've got our email addresses, and we'll happily work with people and give them information. But please do, I'm so glad you asked the question, because there is lots of stuff you can do, and you don't have to understand the technical stuff. I've already demonstrated I don't know a great deal about it. That doesn't mean I can't help by going out and raising awareness, because I've got the backup of colleagues back at RNIB to answer the really difficult technical questions. So any opportunities you have, you know, please do what you can to make people aware.
Okay, I'd like to say thank you, perhaps.